are back. Welcome to our show. It's a brand new year and a brand new season of Wirecast Live. I hope your holidays were wonderful. And we are here with an exciting new episode, and you can see a brand new look for you this season to kick off things in Season 3. We're bringing on live streaming expert and video compression guru Jan Ozer, and we're going to be diving into everything that makes video compression and video streaming possible on today's episode. It's going to be a fun one. That and a whole lot more. You're watching Wirecast Live. I'll see you after the credits. Welcome to another episode of Wirecast Live, our first episode of Season 3. I am your host, Andrew Haley, and each week you can find us here live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter or Periscope at 2:30 p.m. Pacific Time. We're in California, and we dive into expert topics here on the show, and we bring on the experts to tell us about anything we want to know about related to live streaming. Now, we do have some expertise. That's something of what we do here at Telestream and with the Wirecast live streaming software, but we don't know everything, and we certainly don't pretend to, which is why we bring on the experts. And we do have a great expert on the line with us today, and we will be interviewing him all about live video codecs, live video streaming, and everything he knows about that. And we'll get to him in just a moment. I'm excited to bring him on for this interview. But if you want to get subscribed to our email list or find out about upcoming shows, this is a great place to tune in. You can sign up at our email list at telestream.net/wirecastlive, and we'll send you a link to the show as well as information on upcoming guests and topics, which is a great place to get notified and mark your calendars. Speaking of which, next week we have a great show for you. We're going to be bringing on Phil Thompson and Steve Lacey from streamingchurch.tv, and I'm going to be talking about how to create great online church services with them. They are the experts. They run a platform specifically for churches, and they're audio and video broadcasting, and they really know what makes a good online church service and what doesn't. So we'll be getting into that. Mark your calendars. That is next Thursday on January 18th at 2:30 p.m. So you'll find that right here. You can always watch the on-demand version. We do record these and post them after the fact, so I encourage you to check it out. And leave a comment or tell us where you're watching from right now. I really appreciate that, and it helps us know who's watching and who's engaging, and you can also ask questions. Today, if you want to ask a question on Twitter or help us find it, we can even put it on the screen. You will want to use the hashtag AskOzer, AskOzer, and that is how you can get a question into our live streaming expert today. Now, it is time for our new segment, our weekly news of the week, or what's new in the news. Now, there is a lot that's going on, and I just tried, since we've been gone for a while on this episode, I tried to pick some topics that might be helpful for you over the long haul, and some interesting things that have happened in the last month-ish. Sometimes I just miss an important story and I don't bring it on, so, some of these may be a couple months old for those of you, but you never know what we're going to find with the News of the Week segment. So bring it on. Our first news item is that Amazon and Samsung have announced that they will now support the HDR10 Plus standard for all Amazon original content, Amazon Prime Video and Amazon Originals. Now, what does that mean? HDR10 Plus stands for High Dynamic Range Plus, which is a standard that basically turns your television, if you have correct television, into something that can represent colors and color spaces and brightness to a much closer degree than ever before, much similar to what you actually see with your eye. So these will make these Amazon Originals really stand out. They will suddenly look so much better, but you do need to have a very nice TV, obviously made by Samsung, to watch them. So if you're curious, you should go check out the HDR10 Plus standard and how it's going to help watch your content even better now. It's a pretty big news item. I think that HDR10 is going to be everywhere soon, and you'll be seeing it in all kinds of television, TV programs, television manufacturers, games, and content, because it really does look amazing. When you see not dynamic range content next to high dynamic range content, you'll see that it's a big difference, and it's something you just have to see for yourself. All right, the next big news story, and this I have to put on there because I'm a bit of a sci-fi geek. This was a novel I read several years ago called Altered Carbon, and it was actually recommended me by my old math teacher, who's also a big sci-fi geek. And this is a fantastic story, and Netflix has acquired the rights to it and is producing what they're calling, the most epic TV series that they've ever produced. They're saying that the budget for this sci-fi series is going to be more than the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones combined. So that's pretty amazing that they're going to put that much money into this. It should be a blockbuster series, the next sort of House of Cards, Game of Thrones. I'm really excited. This story is really cool. It takes place in the future where death doesn't mean anything and all that stuff. So check this out. It should be coming out this year, and keep your eyes out. Definitely get your Netflix subscription if it's something you don't have, because you'll want to see this. I think it should be pretty cool. Okay, I just had to put that in there. Now, the next news item that I want to bring on here comes from a site called Tubular Insights. If you don't know Tubular Insights, they're very, very good at keeping track of online video trends and video marketing. They do a lot of research, and they publish those in articles and blog posts. They're very good at what they do. And there's a nice article on there called 2017, the year that changed everything in online video. You can read it for yourself. It's pretty short, but the basic takeaway is that we're seeing a massive uptick in sponsored video content on Facebook and YouTube and so forth. But, this is content where it's actually really engaging. So, for example, this is a sponsored, you wouldn't even realize it for a second, but you'll see this as a sponsored post. Right there was the Chobani yogurt sponsorship right there. And they're showing you how to make some great overnight banana oatmeal with, I'm sure, a ton of sugar content. But it's awesome. It just takes you right in. You immediately want to watch it. And at the same time, it is sponsored content. So somebody made some money off of it. Chobani gets some advertising out of it, and everybody wins, and then the viewer gets a better ad. And on that note, there's going to be a lot of announcements coming in the next year, I think, with Facebook, Google, and more other platforms with better, more responsible, more targeted ads that you'll actually be interested in watching. So Google has announced that they will only be allowing ads that fit within their standards for, better advertising, because they don't want people to get turned off by the ads they're showing. They want them to be relevant. Research has shown that people don't mind ads as long as they're interesting and relevant to you. Like if you are perhaps in retirement and, looking at a hip replacement, you don't want to see an ad necessarily for bungee jumping. It's just not necessarily relevant to you and your lifestyle at that moment. Conversely, if you're a young Gen Yer or millennial, you may not necessarily want to see information about retirement packages or things like that at this time. It's just a little less relevant to you, and you feel like the advertiser or whoever is serving up that ad doesn't care about you or really know anything about you. So it's helpful when you see ads that are related to you, and I think all the advertisers and all the major platforms are on board with this, so you should see much more of this type of content, and the numbers are backing it up. On Facebook, they are up 258% the views for sponsored content like this. So if you want to get your business started or get more word out about what you're doing, then this is a great way to do it. Tell an interesting, engaging video that pulls people right in and right into the ad, and they'll watch it, and you will see the results will speak for themselves. So we've seen that jump up quite a bit. Check that out. Lots more to come on that information, but that is our news for the week. And with that, I'd like to move on to our main segment. And joining us now live from his home in Galix, Virginia, is author, streaming expert, and contributing editor to Streaming Media Magazine, Mr. Jan Ozer. Welcome, Jan.
Good to be here, Andrew.
Thanks for coming on the show. This is a great way for us to kick off the first episode of our Season 3 of WirecastLive. And for those of our audience who may not be familiar with your background, can you briefly explain how does someone become a live streaming expert?
My key specialty is probably more in the compression space than the live streaming. I've certainly done a lot of that. But started working with compression back in 1992, 1993. With a company called Iterated Systems, and that was back in the days where it was even pre-video compression. It was still image compression before JPEG was established as the standard. And then I went out on my own, started doing a lot of writing, and basically progressed through CD-ROM, DVD, into the web, And, in the web, from modem to DSL to cellular to all the different transport mechanisms we're using today. Along the way, I had kids. I started shooting a lot of video. Live streaming became a thing. And, I started working a lot in live streaming as well. So, it's video production, compression, live production are all things I've written about, all things that I've, done a lot of.
Well, I don't think there's anyone better than you to talk to about this topic, because really I've read a lot of your work and a lot of your articles. You've done great primers on video and video compression, as well as codecs and how they, what are the optimal settings for them. In fact, you just published a book last year, Video Compression by the Numbers. So I think it's great for us to, for our audience that just is getting into this stuff or may not know really what it is. Can you briefly explain what is video compression and why is it important?
Yeah, compression is the thing that makes video on the web possible, and actually video everywhere possible, whether it's on your TV via cable or satellite, or on your iPhone or your Android device. I mean, anytime you see video and it's not in a studio, it's compressed, because video is simply too big to transport if you don't compress it. So, what compression is you'll hear the term codec thrown around a lot. Codec stands for compress, decompress, and we compress in the lab with a compression technology or a codec, and then we distribute that via one of the mechanisms that I talked about a moment ago to one of the devices I talked about a moment ago, and there it is decompressed. And without the compression component of it, we couldn't deliver to any of those endpoints.
And what is so when video is compressed, I understand that it's made smaller and it's sent over. Why does it then have to be decompressed on the other end? Why can't it just be played at the new size or the compression file? Is there something going on with the math there that must happen at both ends?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the technically all video compression technologies are called lossy. And when we say lossy, it means we throw information away, which is why when you look at video on very low bandwidth devices like iPhones, sometimes it'll look blocky, sometimes it'll look smeared. So what happens is we turn the video itself into some mathematical representation of that. The more you compress, the more you lose. But all we're delivering is that mathematical representation. That's what the codec does. So once we have it on the decode side, on the viewer side, we have to decompress that and try and get it as close to the original as possible. So without the decompression step, you wouldn't be seeing anything that you could watch.
Interesting. Okay. So now codecs have come a long way. They've started out, like you were saying, back in the day, and they were probably for videos that were very tiny, like 120 pixels by 60 pixels or something like that on CD-ROMs. And since then, we've really come a lot further. It's been 20, 30 years since those days, and can you explain sort of what you've seen over time as where the improvements have happened, and what are the current most popular methods of compression and video saving size on video and saving bandwidth and bit rates?
Sure. I mean, it's important to remember that we started with SD video. So SD video back in the 90s and early 2000s was 740 by 480 or 854 by 480, something, 720 by 480. I guess those are the magic numbers. So that was as big as it got. And the compression technologies we used back then to put it on CD-ROM are names that only a few people remember, India, Cinepac. And we were dealing with files that were typically either 320 by 240 or 640 by 480 if they were huge. And of course, the aspect ratio back then was 4 by 3. Then we progressed from SD to HD, which started at 720 and went to 1080p. And we kind of transformed into a multitude of different compression technologies, standardizing on a technology called H.264, which really came into prominence in 2006, 2007 when Apple and Adobe adopted it, and really is the primary codec in use today. But that is primarily targeted towards HD resolutions, 1080p. Since then, we've gone to 4K, and a new generation of compression technologies have kind of come together to encode, 4K and the 1080p. So we're seeing technologies like HEVC is one that a lot of people have heard of, VP9, and those are targeted towards the high end of 1080p and 4K as well. And we're seeing another technology called AV1, which is really even targeted beyond those. So we've seen a continual increase in the resolution of video, and we've seen new compression technologies designed to compress those to deliverable sizes and decompress on the decode side as well. And I guess the last phase of that, which is 4K but also 8K, is the whole VR side. So, VR is so far beyond what we even dreamed of back in, back when we started in the video compression, that it's remarkable.
Yeah, things have really come a very, very long way. And I think one of the key things here is that a standard like H.264 or HEVC or AV1 doesn't seem to get adopted until hardware manufacturers make chips sort of that are natively built into devices. Like Apple recently included HEVC chips in all of their devices, and Intel has also historically included some H.264 chips, like the QuickSync chip and things like that, on their processors. Can you sort of explain a little bit, why are those chips needed or necessary? And where are we at these days with, say AV1 just sounds like too far in the future. I mean, we haven't really even seen a widespread adoption of HEVC yet. Could you explain sort of where we're at with that adoption phase and why those chips are needed and what chips you may be seeing after these HEVC chips, or where we're at with that?
Well, video compression, specifically the decode side, is so specific that it's best performed in application-specific chipsets or hardware-specific gates within a chipset, like a system in a chip. So with a technology like HEVC, if there weren't specific hardware decoders on mobile devices, playback would seriously diminish the battery life of those devices. And if you're Netflix or you're Hulu, you don't want to send a movie out that may be more compact, but it's going to cut the battery life of your viewer in half. So that's why hardware support is so necessary, particularly on mobile devices. And you used the word standard a few minutes ago. If anybody's watching this and knows the whole battle between AV1 and HEVC, I mean, it's kind of a, I guess we can talk about de facto and perhaps de jure standards. I mean, HEVC is a standard that was formulated by a standards body. AV1 is a technology that was put together by a group called the Alliance for Open Media. It's a very, very powerful group. It's got, Google, Cisco, Intel, Microsoft, Netflix, Mozilla, Apple just joined. So it's a very, very important industry group, but it's hard to say it's a standard in the same way that H.264 and HEV is a standard. Getting to your question, Apple announced in June that they were going to add HEVC to their HLS or HTTP live streaming spec, which is an adaptive streaming technology you can use to deliver video to Apple devices. And they did that because most of the phones that they've shipped since, I think, the iPhone 5 or iPhone 6 includes HEVC hardware decode. Now in January, Apple joined the Alliance for Open Media, and presumably they'll support the AV1 codec, but there is no similar hardware in Apple devices, which means until that happens, which probably will take at least 2 years, you're not going to have mass market AV1 decode on Apple devices unless something magical happens, like the codec becomes very, very easy to decode, which really nobody expects. So I think H.264 is the current standard for mobile delivery. I think HEVC will be the next generation standard, particularly since it's played on Android devices since Android 5, and now it plays on Apple devices. And then in 2 years, perhaps we'll see AV1 start to fold in and become a thing in mobile playback.
Well, and actually that comes to one of our questions. We asked our listeners, viewers, to submit questions with the hashtag #AskOzer. So if you do have one of those questions, just tweet that or put it in the Facebook comments or chats, hashtag #AskOzer, ASKOZER, all one word, and we'll get that and we'll send it over to Jan for sort of an answer. But one of our users submitted, Mavic actually, asked, will AV1 be the new H.264 in regards to common adoption standards with all the major players that are now involved in the alliance? So that seems to be basically your answer, is that right now you see the rise of HEVC, and then perhaps AV1 is positioned to take HEVC's crown once you get the field programmable chips or the application-specific chips into enough hardware devices, which we haven't seen yet.
Well, I think the application-specific chips are most important in mobile, and mobile is obviously a huge market, so I'm not discounting that. The other thing that could happen to derail AV1 is the whole intellectual property side. So ever since Google shipped VP8, which is a precursor compression technology to AV1, there's a lot of people, analysts and pundits, who have said that it violates the intellectual property rights of some of the H.264 patent holders. So there's this common, and consistent undercurrent of potential AV1 lawsuits that may derail that technology. But we've heard that since VP8, as I said, nothing has ever happened, and now we've got this incredible war chest. I mean, Alliance has all the companies I mentioned. Cisco. There's a bunch, billions and billions and billions of dollars of market cap, and it's hard to imagine that they're going to get sued and lose. But I think there are some companies that are concerned about AV1 for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, even if the lawsuit does go forward around AV1, it seems like the math, just the back of the napkin math on that is, $50 million, $100 million lawsuit versus, hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of royalties that they have to pay moving forward. If on a if the other HEVC or one of the standards bodies, the patent holders actually win out. I mean, maybe, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but I think we're not too worried about Google and Apple's ability to fight off lawsuits when it comes to, the video standards.
Well, I mean, Apple just lost a big suit, I think, to Nokia. Well, they didn't lose the suit, but they ended up settling for big dollars, and that's the H.264 spec. But Apple knew that when they joined the Alliance for Open Media. So, I mean, I don't. It's the kind of thing where if I was working with a client and they said, should we adopt AV1, I would say, here are all the companies that are using it, are members of the Alliance, but there is some small risk that the IP side could come back and bite you.
Okay. Can you explain why different codecs are necessary for or better suited to specific frame rates and sizes and formats? I mean, why is, maybe it isn't, but why is H.264 better suited to 1080 and 720 and HD, and why would HEVC be better suited to 4K or larger video sizes and an AV1 even larger than that? Why can't H.264 persist?
Well, H.264, I mean, it's a good question. H.264 kind of came into being with SD and the early phases of HD, and it wasn't designed for very, very large video. So, one specific example in HEVC is the ability to comprehend larger block sizes. So, if you have a smooth portion of the video, all these technologies work by dividing the image into squares. They quantize the image. And HEVC can handle larger block sizes, which means it can pack more data efficiently in a larger frame. And it's a design limitation of H.264. There's also the ability to use just more advanced compression technologies that couldn't have been used 10 years ago because A, they weren't really needed, and B, we didn't have the computing horsepower to either encode or decode. So the compression technologies continually advance. And they don't so much as do a better job on 720p video, like the SD resolutions. They do a much better job in the higher resolutions.
Okay. So that's my next question: are they backwards compatible? Is HEVC going to do a better job of compressing the quality and maintaining quality of a 1080p or 720p video than even H.264 would?
You're going to see a benefit that increases with higher resolution videos. So if you encoded 640 by 360 with HEVC and H.264, you might see a 10 or 15% advantage for HEVC or VP9. If you encoded a 1080p video, you might see a 35% advantage for HEVC or VP9 over H.264. At 4K, you might see 50 to 60%.
Oh wow!
So
it really
doesn't matter. Yeah, it really doesn't matter so much with the lower resolution videos. It matters a lot when you're looking at VR, or you're looking at VR, which is or should be 4K, or just simply 4K videos.
Yeah, with Wirecast, I mean, 4K and HEVC and even VR video, I mean, it's something that we start to get more and more questions about. And because most people's processors on most of their computers made in the last few years just aren't up to the task of encoding efficiently 4K video, particularly live in real time, it's a real stretch. And then, of course, you have to factor in the pipeline of their internet connection and the bandwidth, and then even their viewers. Most of the viewers, I think, on average in the United States, can't pull down a 4K connection. So there was always this question of whether or not it's useful. And so we've sort of held off on that. But as we I think things we're moving along. The infrastructure is getting better. The processes are getting better. We're beginning to see more and more people buy 4K cameras, and even the capture cards are coming along as well. So I think it's only a matter of time before we address, a fully native 4K workflow inside of our Wirecast. But in the meantime, is there something that it begs the question, at what point is a processor ready to handle 4K video? Would you basically say wait until your graphics card either has a chip, like an NVIC chip that can do it, or your processor has a QuickSync chip that can do it? Don't try to do it all natively on the CPU. Is that basically what you would advise most people when they're handling these files and getting them ready to compress and send out, or even record into an MP4 they want to upload to YouTube?
It's such a variable thing. The thing I worry about when I'm broadcasting live via PC is CPU overhead. And that's going to depend on whether I'm mixing streams or whether I'm simply encoding and distributing a stream. So there's just a whole lot of variables. But I think whatever you do, you've got a magic number. For me, it's like 50%. If I see this CPU consistently going over 50%, I start to worry about, glitches. And so, if I'm considering 4K, that's one of the things I'm going to look at. More importantly, the point you raised, which is all out, getting it out of the building. 720p does great at 4 megabits per second. H.264, 1080p looks great at 8 megabits per second. That's pretty comfortable for most outbound connections, but 4K, you're going to need 16 to 20, even with HEVC, to get really, really good quality. And I think that's a very expensive connection currently, and there's so few people that can really view it that I don't see, other than specialty applications to like sporting events that are delivered via cabled connections, via IPTV. I think that's where you're going to see live 4K hitting first. And the average Joe, the church, the college, the business, I think 4K is a few years off.
Well, I'm glad you brought up sports versus, say, House of Worship or a conference or something like that. And then you also brought up some bit rates in there. We've seen a variability in the sort of recommended bit rates for 720. Facebook likes, for example, a default of 720 at 4 megabits per second, which is what you just brought up. But we've seen other people be very comfortable with 2.2 at 720, and we've seen 1080s at 4 megabits per second. What are some rules and some guidelines you can suggest when it comes to the size and the frame rate and then the content types? In your experience running tests and benchmarks, you mentioned 4 megabits per second at 720, but I mean, would you recommend 2 megabits per second for 720 for some content?
More is always better. Probably the big friction occurs, when do you have enough bandwidth to go from 720 to 1080? That's kind of a decision point. I mean, I would always, I know what my connection is. I would always push a pretty good chunk of that, but not try and get close to the edges of it. So if I'm doing, 1080p, I know my connection can handle, 8 to 10 outbound. So I wouldn't go beyond that. So that's one point. What can your connection handle? The second point is to understand that I've done tests a few times where I looked at the additional, every video that you send out is being transcoded. So the question becomes, how much better is the transcoded file that your viewer actually sees if it's encoded from a 4 megabit per second 720p file or a 2.2 megabit per second 720p file? And every time I've ever tested that, I've been really surprised to see that it makes very little difference in terms of overall quality on the recompressed file. Or very few people are going to see the 4 megabit or the 2.2 megabit per second file. A lot of people are going to see the files transcoded from that. And more quality on the outbound side really doesn't make that substantial a difference on the transcoded side at all. So really, 4 or 2.2, the typical viewer probably wouldn't know the difference from a file transcoded from that file.
And do you, and that's a good question. So when you're sending to YouTube or Facebook, they are doing some re-encoding and some transcoding of what the original source that you're sending them. And you're saying that if you send, say, Facebook a 4 megabit per second as per their recommendations, or YouTube, their 1080 recommended settings, when a user or viewer has that bandwidth available to watch the actual video on the other side, to consume that video, you're saying there won't be that much difference in terms of the quality of the video that they're seeing based on what you sent?
That's right. So if you're sending a 720p file to YouTube, they're probably going to redistribute that file, but they're also going to redistribute a lot of files at lower resolutions and lower data rates for people watching on mobile or who's slower desktop connections. And looking at the files transcoded from that 4 megabit per second source or the 2 megabit per second source, you're not going to see that much of a difference. In fact, the numbers are really, really surprisingly insignificant between those quality sources. So I would never push to get a higher quality stream out, because the risk of the stream stopping because of bandwidth loss is not worth the minimal additional quality that stream's going to deliver to people who are actually viewing it.
Okay. Let's quickly talk about the actual encoding settings. In Wirecast, we offer, and a lot of, if you have a good compressor, you have a lot of options that you can configure. You can set the encoding quality profile, and in H.264, say in Wirecast, there's settings from 1 to 10 in terms of the quality, fast, very fast in terms of it seems to, and I'm sure you can explain this a little better than I can, but it seems to strike a balance between the speed at which it can encode something and the amount of processing power that it's going to take. Typically, I think we set ours as a default around 3, pretty fast, but not the fastest. I saw an article from you several years ago where you had done some comparisons on those profiles, those quality settings, and you had said that you didn't see a ton of difference, beyond, the sort of the middle tier. Could you explain kind of what those do and how they work? And then could you quickly come around and talk about main, baseline, and the different profiles that are available to people when they're encoding and when they should use one versus another?
Sure. So we're talking about two different things.
Okay.
We're talking about profiles in H.264, and every H.264 codec is going to have 3 profiles, main, baseline, and high. So that's one item. And the other thing we're talking about are encoding presets. Mm-hmm. And the presets are going to vary based upon which H.264 codec you're using. So the X.264 codec, which is available in Wirecast, does use the 1 through 10. But the Intel H.264 codec, which is also available, may use a different preset system. So it's important to understand that profiles apply to every H.264 codec, but the preset side, which, as you said, balances encoding complexity against quality, is going to be, the nomenclature is going to be unique to every H.264 codec. And HEVC is the same way. So in Wirecast, if you're encoding with the X.264 codec, which is the highest quality software-only codec, you've got 10 profiles you can use, going from ultra-fast to placebo, which is very, very slow. And really, the article you're referring to, I encoded the same file using those presets, not in a live situation, but in a video-on-demand situation, and then looked at the encoding time and looked at the output quality, and did not beyond the very, very fast presets on the extreme edges of the quick side. I saw very little quality difference. So for me, if I'm putting together an encoding system, or I'm getting encoding settings together, I'm going to use the maximum preset I can without pushing CPU beyond the 50% level that I talked about a moment ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to try and avoid the bottom 2 or 3, because those are the ones that deliver noticeably poor quality. But once I get into the fast, 2 or 3 over, I don't know the nomenclature offhand, but once I get beyond the fastest 2 or 3, I think the additional quality you get beyond that is going to be minimal. Mm. And then on the profile side, again, you're balancing encode complexity primarily on the decode side against quality. I would avoid the baseline profile if I could, but I wouldn't use the high profile in preference to the main, because while you do see some difference between baseline and main. You see very, very little difference between main and high.
Main and high. So in general, you recommend the main profile, and in general, you recommend the encoding preset around the 5 range, the middle range of, say, a 10 preset list.
I would say 3. I mean, what happens is you get in, you're a novice, you start looking at the presets, and you say, well, why would I want to do this fast when there's this very slow setting available? Because that's obviously going to give me better quality. And the reason you do that is because you don't want your machine to shut down trying to encode the video using that preset. So, it's and I think Wirecast does a good job setting templates or creating templates that do a nice job on the encoding side. If you don't know what you're doing, I wouldn't mess with them. I mean, if you're streaming 1080p video and your CPU is at 15% consistently, maybe you want to try a different preset. But if you're 40 to 50% CPU during the event, I wouldn't mess with it.
Got it. All right. Well, that was a really good explanation of and some good advice there from by somebody who's done a lot of tests on this stuff and really investigated the nuts and bolts. It was interesting to note that I'd heard that sometimes it's better to use main or high profiles depending on whether, and then use baseline, for example, if you're going to mobile devices. Is that really not ring true anymore, considering that most mobile devices, I mean, at least in the last few years, should have the capability to decode the high and the encoding complexity of the main and the high profiles?
Well, keep in mind that in most cases, the person using Wirecast is not encoding the streams that are delivered to mobile devices.
Right.
So that's not a setting that you control via Wirecast. Now, if you are a Wowza user and you can set up your encoding presets in Wowza, that's when you might have to make the decision to use the baseline profile for lower resolution, lower data rate streams in your encoding ladder. Mm-hmm. And about a year ago, Apple basically said, we recommend that you use the high profile for all devices because the devices that can't handle that are so small in overall distribution now that they don't matter. We're talking iPhone 4s and older. Now, Android is a different problem because while practically we would expect that phones of a similar generation would have similar playback capabilities, the Android recommendation from Google is to use the baseline profile. So there's 2 H.264 decoders in an Android phone. One is from Google, and that's baseline only. And then the hardware vendors can also put in a hardware codec, as you talked about. So, you see a mix between people who actually implement the encode side for delivery to those devices. Some people still use the baseline profile just to make sure they don't lose any viewers at the lower end. But a lot of people are also moving to high profile only for all the streams that they're producing.
Interesting. And those, again, just as a caveat, like you said, wouldn't necessarily apply to people who are just streaming to Facebook or YouTube, because those will be handled, those mobile phone encodes will be handled on the platform side and not at the Wirecast side. So it's not necessarily something you have to worry. So for you Wirecast streamers, a main is just fine. Or if you want to use the high, then that should be fine too. Okay, and then I think we are coming to the end of our time here, and I want to respect your time and just wrap up with a last few questions. First, I think if people want to learn more about this stuff, exactly how profiles work and how different encoding settings and codecs work, where can they get more information, and where can they find out more about what you're up to?
Okay, the primary book that I came out with in 2016, December, really early 2017, is a book called Video Encoding by the Numbers. And what I tried to do in that book is I tried to tie encoding decisions to specific objective quality metrics. So rather than say VBR is better, I encoded a bunch of files using variable bitrate encoding and compared it to files encoded with CBR or constant bitrate encoding, and then measured the difference in PSNR or other video quality metric. And that way I could say, if you do VBR, you'll get X% improved quality. So when I say video encoding by the numbers, those are the numbers I'm referring to. It's all tie encoding decisions to objective quality metrics. An earlier book is called Streaming Video for Multiple Screen Delivery. That book is from 2013. It didn't really go into so much the encoding parameter size, as it did the technology fundamentals, standards. It's current up through, I think, H.264 with the mention of HEVC. But it's a much better book for theoretical purposes. And it's also a book that's got a lot on live encoding. So there's 4 chapters on live, talks about the different tools you can use like Wirecast. Wirecast is in there. Talks about different services, talks about different settings. And by services, I mean, live stream, YouTube Live. I don't think Facebook was around then, but just, how to choose a service. So if you want to learn some basics of live encoding, I think that's the better book. If you want to figure out how to actually set your encoding parameters, then the
video encoding by numbers. Got it. And those are available wherever you can get books, on Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Amazon. There are links on my website, Streaming and Learning Center, to both of the books.
Perfect. Well, I encourage people to go check out those books if you're at all interested in that. And actually, you might be the guy to talk to. I was wondering if you had any quick command line, x264 command line options you like or you would recommend to people just to keep in their back pockets. Anything that comes to mind?
Interesting that you raised that question. I mean, when I was doing the book, Video Encoding by the Numbers, it quickly became apparent that I couldn't do the amount of experimentation that I wanted to do using a third-party program like Squeeze or any of the other programs that I had on my systems. So what I started doing is I started doing everything with FFmpeg. And then when I started doing that, I said, well, since I'm doing it, I might as well write about it. So the book, Video Encoding by the Numbers, every operation shows what command lines I use. So if you look at the chapter on resolution, you'll see, okay, this is how you set resolution. And then I kind of excerpted that out into a book called, sounding like an infomercial, but it's a book called Learn FFmpeg in 30 Minutes or Less, which is 120 pages, all with the specific commands that I used in the other book, and supported by batch files that you can download that actually have the commands. So this will take you even to creating encoding ladders for HLS. It goes to that level in FFmpeg, and also the Apple, the 3 Apple tools for HLS. So it's pretty, it's $30. It's not a lot of money, but if it really can get you started with FFmpeg in 20, 30 minutes to encoding real files you can use right then.
Can you quickly, for those who don't know what FFmpeg is, can you explain what it is?
FFmpeg is I'm laughing because it's so all the big producers, whether it's Netflix or Google with YouTube or Hulu, they all have their own encoding farms, and they use a program called FFmpeg to manage all their files. So what FFmpeg is, a big open source encoding tool that anybody can access. You can download it for free, and you can use it to produce, a bunch of files in a bunch of different formats and a bunch of other operations. So you literally can, you can convert files to any codec. You can resize them. You can change the frame rate. You can package them for HLS. You can, just do so much stuff. And even the big cloud encoding platforms like Encoding.com or Hybrid, they're also based on FFmpeg. So it's the most widely used program that very, very few people who aren't developers have actually heard of. But if you really want to, if you don't want to spend $500 for an encoding package, or you want to develop your own encoding capabilities, FFmpeg, without question, is the tool that you want to build around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of our tools like Telestream Cloud is our cloud encoding site, and then obviously we work with FFmpeg and keep an eye on how it's working, because obviously as builders of encoding tools that try to extrapolate down to an easier to use level, we definitely keep our eye on it. Now, it's pretty cool that I think that it's basically a group effort, and it keeps track on sort of the latest sort of codecs and things that are happening out there in the world. And it's a collective, almost like the Wikipedia for video, I think, in a sense, and how codecs are implemented.
It's remarkable. You can get access to X.264, which is the highest quality H.264 codec. You can get access to X.265, which is a very high quality HEVC codec, VP9. So you can access all of those via this one program, as well as I think you can encode Dolby now. I mean, it's crazy what that program can do. It's absolutely crazy. And if you it's the kind of thing where if you spend 10 or 15 minutes doing it, and I'm an old guy, right? So I mean, I know how to work my way around a command line, which is not hard, but it's just a skill that unless you started computing back in the 80s and 90s, you didn't need to learn. But if you know that, you really don't need to use and Vantage is a great program and it does a lot more stuff than what we're talking about. But for simple in and out encoding, if you can create a batch file, it's just crazy how much work you can do with FFmpeg. And for me, it's really simpler because I do a lot of repetitive stuff. So maybe it's not a good example. When I test, the 10 presets, I create 10 encodes, and all I do is change one value, right? Use this preset, this preset, this preset. So that I do a lot of repetitive stuff, and maybe that's why it's so good for me, because so little changes between the files. But you can do so much, and if you don't understand command line processing, it's just very, very efficient.
That's very cool. All right. Well, I think that's all the time that we have. Jan, a final question for you, and this comes from one of our users. What are your goals for 2018? And it's a new year, new month, new goals. What are your plans?
It's a good. I guess my high-level goal is to have fixed goals. It's the time of year for that. I just got an email from a guy named James Clear. I don't know how many of your viewers are familiar with him, but he's a motivational kind of speaker, and he really kind of clued me in that I need to. He went over his review of 2017, and it was an amazing year for him. So my goals would be expand viewership on my website, build revenue from my website, build my encoding business and my consulting encoding business, and lose weight.
Yeah, everyone's got that one. That's got to be on everyone's New Year's list. So head over to Streaming Learning Center. I've actually got it pulled up here, and this is where you can contact Jan. You can get latest articles that he's writing or working on. It's a fantastic place. I highly recommend you check it out. This is where I really started when I was learning about video compression and video codecs after getting back into it after a few years as a teacher. So I need to bone up on my knowledge and see what had changed. And Jan, your website was one of the first places I found just by doing all my searches. A lot of them led there. So thank you for all that you're doing for our industry and for the thought leadership, and really continuing to hold vendors and manufacturers accountable for how they are implementing these things. And if you guys want to check out more, just head over there and reach out to Jan. We'll put up his contact card one more time. And Jan, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Andrew. Good to be here.
You too. Take care.
Take care.
All right, folks, that was Jan Ozer, our guest for today, and the first guest of the Season 3 of Wirecast Live. I want to say thanks to all of you for watching. This was a really fun show and a great opportunity to talk to a video compression expert. I mean, really has done a lot of the tests. He writes all the articles, and he really, this stuff is fascinating. If the video is at all in your, what you're doing as either profession or as a hobby, this is really the nuts and bolts of it, how to work it. And as you can see, he can teach you how to get into it and optimize settings the way you want to make your video look the way you want it to look, and use the quality and the resources that you have most efficiently. So I highly recommend you go check out his stuff. And I want to say thanks to our partners for making this show possible. They do so much for us. We have a lot of the equipment here. It really does take a village when it comes to video production and doing live shows like this, and we could not do it without our partners. And I want to say also thank you to our viewers. If you're curious, next week we have Phil Thompson and Steve from streamingchurch.tv. And they will be on to Steve Lacey, thank you, from streamingchurch.tv. They will be on to talk about how to have great online church services. They are experts in this. They've been doing it for many years, and they really know how to optimize online worship services when it comes to live video, audio, streaming, and making an experience for your viewers. So if you're at all interested in that, or you happen to go to a church, or want your church to start streaming services, check out this episode. We'll be live same time, 2:30 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday on Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope or Twitter. So you can subscribe on our email list or follow follow us on social media at Telestream Wirecast, at Wirecast, or WirecastTube. Share this out, share it with a friend, or click the like or subscribe button. And if you want to get an email right in your inbox, we'll just send you what the next show topic is and a link the minute we're live. You can find that at our website at telestream.net/WirecastLive. This has been another episode of Wirecast Live. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you next episode.